The soft hum of wedding preparations filled the air. The small countryside chapel was adorned with blooming flowers, their sweet fragrance mixing with the crisp morning breeze. Guests mingled outside, their laughter and chatter blending with the distant chirping of birds. It was a picture-perfect day for a wedding. Inside a cozy bridal suite, Anna stood in front of a full-length mirror, adjusting the delicate lace veil that framed her face. Her heart raced with a mix of excitement and nerves as she glanced at her reflection. This was the day she had dreamed of for years, the day she would marry James, the love of her life. Everything was falling into place, just as she had envisioned, except for one small detail. Her dog, Toby, seemed unusually restless. Toby had been Anna's loyal companion for years, always by her side through life's highs and lows. Normally calm and affectionate, he had been acting strangely all morning. He paced around the room, his ears twitching at every sound, and occasionally let out low whines that tugged at Anna's heart. She tried to reassure him with gentle pats and soothing words, but his unease didn't fade. "Toby, what's gotten into you today?" Anna asked softly, kneeling to his level. She scratched behind his ears, hoping to calm him down, but his eyes remained fixed on her with an intensity she couldn't quite place. He leaned against her, his weight heavy and deliberate, as though he were trying to anchor her in place. Anna's maid of honor, Claire, entered the room with a bright smile. "You look stunning," she said, her voice filled with excitement. But her expression shifted to concern when she noticed Toby's behavior. "Is he okay? He seems off." Anna shook her head. "I don't know. He's been like this all morning. Maybe he's just nervous about all the commotion." Claire chuckled. "Well, he does have a way of knowing when something big is happening. Remember when he barked at James the first time you introduced them? He knew before you did that James was the one." Anna smiled at the memory, her heart softening as she stroked Toby's fur. He's always been protective. Maybe he's just overwhelmed. Outside, the sound of the organ began to play, signaling the start of the ceremony. Anna stood, smoothing the fabric of her gown as she took a deep breath. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. "Ready?" Claire asked, holding out Anna's bouquet. Anna nodded, her nerves giving way to a surge of determination. "Ready!" But as she stepped toward the door, Toby moved to block her path. His body was firm, his gaze unwavering. He let out a sharp bark, startling both Anna and Claire. "Toby, no!" Anna said, her tone a mix of confusion and frustration. She tried to step around him, but he refused to budge. "What's he doing?" Claire asked, her brow furrowed. "I don't know," Anna replied, her voice tinged with worry. She crouched down again, trying to coax Toby to move, but he remained planted in place. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, Anna felt a strange, almost desperate emotion radiating from him. The organ music swelled, signaling that the procession was about to begin. Claire glanced at her watch, her voice laced with urgency. "Anna, we have to go. Everyone's waiting." Anna hesitated, torn between the demands of the day and the unspoken message in Toby's eyes. Something about his behavior felt different. More than just nerves, more than his usual protectiveness. It was as if he were trying to tell her something, but she couldn't understand what. With a deep breath, Anna stood and gently took Toby's collar. "Come on, Toby," she said softly. "It's time to go." Reluctantly, he allowed her to guide him to the door, though his resistance was clear in every step. As they reached the threshold, he paused again, letting out another bark that echoed down the hallway. Anna's heart clenched at the sound, a strange unease creeping into her chest. "Anna," Claire urged, her tone firmer now, "we really have to go." Anna nodded, forcing a smile as she looked down at Toby. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, though the words felt as much for herself as for him. "Everything's going to be okay." But as she turned toward the chapel, Toby's behavior lingered in her mind like a shadow, his bark ringing in her ears. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something she couldn't yet see. Anna walked down the hallway with Toby reluctantly trailing behind her. The closer they got to the chapel, the more insistent his behavior became. He tugged against her gentle grip on his collar, letting out small whines that echoed off the walls. It wasn't like him to act this way, especially around people in commotion, which he usually navigated with calm curiosity. Claire hurried ahead, the sound of her heels clicking against the floor as she reached the double doors leading to the ceremony. "You're going to miss your own wedding if we don't move," she said with a nervous laugh, peeking inside to check on the waiting guests. But Anna couldn't ignore the tension in her chest. Toby's resistance wasn't just nerves, it felt purposeful. His actions carried an urgency she didn't understand, yet she couldn't dismiss. Kneeling down again, she cupped his face in her hands, trying to steady his gaze. "Toby, what's wrong?" she whispered. He responded with a low, drawn-out whimper, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. "I've never seen him like this," Anna murmured to Claire as she stood, brushing her gown carefully. "It's like he's trying to tell me something." Claire hesitated, her expression softening. "Maybe he's just overwhelmed with all the excitement. You know how dogs can pick up on our emotions." Anna nodded, though her unease lingered. With a deep breath, she smoothed her dress and adjusted her veil, trying to refocus. "Okay, let's do this," she said, more to herself than anyone else. She took a tentative step toward the chapel doors, but Toby moved in front of her again, his body blocking her path as he let out another sharp bark. "Toby, stop!" Anna exclaimed, her frustration slipping into her voice. The guests inside would surely hear him by now. She glanced at Claire, who looked equally uncertain about what to do next. At that moment, the doors to the chapel opened, and James's brother, Michael, stepped out, a look of mild confusion on his face. "Everything okay out here?" he asked, glancing between Anna and the dog at her feet. Anna forced a smile. "Toby's just having a moment. I'm sure he'll settle down once we're inside." Michael chuckled softly, though his brow furrowed slightly. "Well, James is waiting. Everyone's ready when you are." As Michael stepped back inside, Anna turned to Toby once more. "You need to stay here," she said firmly, her tone gentle but resolute. She motioned for Claire to help guide him away from the aisle, but as soon as they tried, Toby planted himself firmly on the floor, refusing to budge. "Anna, I think you need to let him go with you," Claire suggested, her voice cautious. "He's not going to give up." Anna hesitated, torn between the growing tension in her chest and the need to move forward. Toby had always been a source of comfort and loyalty, her protector in ways no one else could match. She glanced at the doors, then back at him, her resolve faltering. "Okay," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can come." With Toby now at her side, Anna stepped through the doors and into the chapel. The soft sound of the organ swelled as heads turned, the faces of family and friends lighting up at the sight of her. James stood at the altar, his expression one of pure adoration as he locked eyes with her. For a moment, all of Anna's doubts melted away. But Toby's behavior didn't change. As she took slow steps down the aisle, he stayed close to her side, his gaze darting between the rows of guests. Occasionally, he let out a low, throaty sound. Not quite a growl, but enough to make Anna's nerves spike again. Whispers rippled through the crowd, curiosity and confusion mingling in the air. Anna tried to ignore it, focusing instead on James's warm smile. Yet Toby's persistence gnawed at her. Why couldn't he relax? What was he trying to tell her? When they reached the altar, Toby moved to stand directly between Anna and James, his stance firm and protective. James chuckled nervously, his hand reaching out to pat Toby on the head. "Hey buddy, you okay?" he asked, his tone light. But Toby didn't respond with his usual wag of the tail. Instead, he let out a low bark, his eyes fixed intently on James. The murmur among the guests grew louder, and Anna's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," Anna whispered to James, trying to nudge Toby aside. "I don't know what's gotten into him." James smiled, though there was a flicker of something unreadable in his expression. "It's okay," he said, his voice calm. "He's probably just nervous with all the people around." Despite his reassurance, Anna couldn't shake the unease building in her chest. Toby's presence had always been a source of comfort, but today it felt different, like a warning she didn't yet understand. As the officiant began to speak, Toby remained by her side, his body tense, his focus unwavering. Anna tried to listen to the familiar words, the vows she had dreamed of reciting, but her mind was elsewhere, caught between the moment she was living and the silent message Toby seemed desperate to convey. As the ceremony progressed, Anna's mind drifted. The officiant's words blurred into the background, overshadowed by the tension radiating from Toby. He stayed rooted by her side, his stance unyielding, his occasional low whines causing a stir among the guests. Anna struggled to focus, her heart torn between the joy of the moment and the nagging unease that had been building all day. James reached for her hands, his smile warm but slightly strained. "You okay?" he whispered softly, leaning closer. Anna nodded hesitantly. "I think so," she replied, glancing down at Toby. His eyes remained fixed on James, his body positioned like a shield in front of her. It was unsettling, but she couldn't figure out why. Toby had always adored James. Why was he acting so differently today? The officiant cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to the ceremony. "And now, as we come to the exchange of vows, let us celebrate the love that has brought you both to this moment." Anna smiled faintly, shifting her focus back to James. This was the part she had dreamed about, the moment she had rehearsed countless times in her mind. But as James began to speak, something in his demeanor changed. His voice, usually so steady, wavered slightly, and a faint bead of sweat formed on his temple. Toby let out another low bark, breaking the silence. The sound startled James, causing him to pause mid-sentence. Whispers rippled through the guests, their curiosity growing as the tension in the room became palpable. "Sorry," James said quickly, clearing his throat as he attempted to regain his composure. "Where was I?" But Toby wasn't done. He stepped closer to Anna, his body pressing against her leg as he emitted a soft, persistent whine. Anna's breath hitched. Something about Toby's behavior, his unwavering focus, his refusal to back down, made her stomach churn with unease. "Maybe we should," Anna began. But before she could finish, Toby let out a sharp bark that echoed through the chapel. The sound was loud and commanding, silencing the room instantly. All eyes turned to Anna, James, and the dog standing between them. James's face flushed, his jaw tightening as he glanced at the restless dog. "Anna, maybe we should have Toby wait outside," he suggested, his tone more abrupt than usual. It was the first time she had heard irritation in his voice, and it struck her like a cold wind. Anna hesitated. Toby's behavior had been disruptive, yes, but there was something deeper behind it, something she couldn't ignore. She knelt down, her hands trembling as she placed them on Toby's shoulders. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. "What are you trying to tell me?" Toby responded with a low whine, his gaze flicking between Anna and James with an urgency that made her heart race. It was as though he were pleading with her, begging her to see something she was missing. The silence in the room was broken by a sudden shuffle from one of the guests in the back row. Anna barely noticed at first, but Toby's ears twitched, his attention snapping toward the movement. He let out another bark, this one directed at the far end of the chapel. Anna followed his gaze, her pulse quickening as she spotted a man standing hesitantly near the doorway. The man's face was pale, his expression one of nervous determination. He wore a simple suit, his tie slightly askew, and his hands fidgeted at his sides. Anna didn't recognize him immediately, but something about his presence felt familiar. James's reaction, however, was immediate. His face paled, his posture stiffened, and his eyes darted toward the man with a mix of shock and anger. "What are you doing here?" James hissed under his breath, his tone sharp and filled with tension. The man hesitated, his gaze shifting to Anna. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice wavering. "I didn't mean to interrupt, but I had to come." Anna's heart pounded as she looked between the two men. "James, who is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. James opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. His silence was deafening, and it only fueled the growing sense of dread in Anna's chest. Toby barked again, stepping protectively in front of her as though he could sense the storm brewing. The man stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Anna's. "I know this isn't the right time," he said, his voice filled with urgency, "but I needed you to know the truth." "The truth?" Anna repeated, her voice barely audible. James's hand tightened around hers, his grip almost painful. "Don't listen to him," he said quickly, his voice low and strained. "He's just trying to ruin this for us." But the man shook his head. "That's not true. Anna, please. You deserve to know. James hasn't been honest with you." The air in the chapel grew thick with tension, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. Anna felt her knees weaken as she looked at James, her heart silently begging for him to deny the man's words. But his eyes wouldn't meet hers, and that silence spoke louder than any confession. Toby let out a final, piercing bark, his stance unwavering as he remained at Anna's side. It was as though he understood the gravity of the moment, standing as her steadfast protector in the face of uncertainty. The room fell silent, the tension palpable as Anna's gaze shifted between James and the man standing at the doorway. Toby's persistent presence at her side, his bark cutting through the air, was the only sound in the chapel. Anna's hands trembled, her mind racing to piece together the scene unfolding before her. "James," she said softly, her voice cracking under the weight of her fear. "What is he talking about? What truth?" James hesitated, his face betraying a mix of frustration and panic. "Anna, this isn't the time," he said quickly, his voice low but urgent. "Whatever he's here to say, it doesn't matter. He's just trying to ruin what we have." The man stepped closer, his movements tentative but determined. "That's not true, Anna. I didn't come here to ruin anything. I came because I couldn't let you walk into this without knowing." "Knowing what?" Anna asked, her voice rising. Her chest tightened as she looked into James's eyes, searching for answers that he seemed unwilling to give. James's silence was deafening, and Anna felt the ground beneath her shift as the man took another step forward. I'm his brother, he said finally, his voice trembling. And I've tried to stay quiet, but I can't anymore. James isn't who you think he is. The words hit Anna like a physical blow. She stared at the man, her thoughts a chaotic whirl of disbelief and confusion. His brother? She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would his brother? James cut her off, his tone sharp and defensive. He's bitter. He's been against me from the start, always looking for ways to undermine me. Don't let him poison this, Anna. But the man didn't back down. Anna, listen to me, he said urgently. James has been hiding things from you. Debt, legal trouble, things that could destroy the life you're trying to build together. Anna felt her knees weaken, her breath hitching as the weight of the revelation began to settle. She turned to James, her voice trembling. Is this true? Are you in trouble? James's jaw tightened, his eyes darting away as he struggled to find the right words. It's not as bad as he's making it sound, he said finally. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to worry you. I was handling it. Handling it? Anna repeated, her voice breaking. You were keeping it from me. How could you think I wouldn't want to know? Toby let out another bark, his body pressing protectively against Anna's leg as though he could sense her growing distress. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked down at him, his unwavering loyalty grounding her in the midst of the chaos. The man stepped closer, his expression softening. I know this is a lot, but you deserve to make this decision with all the facts. James has been lying to you, Anna. You need to know the truth before you take this step. Anna's vision blurred as tears began to fall, her mind racing with questions she didn't know how to ask. She looked back at James, her heart aching as she saw the tension in his face. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Didn't you trust me? James's shoulders slumped, his defenses faltering under the weight of her words. I was afraid, he admitted, afraid you'd leave if you knew. I didn't want to lose you. The confession only deepened the ache in Anna's chest. She wanted to believe him, to hold on to the love they had built, but the cracks in their foundation felt too wide to ignore. Her thoughts were interrupted by a gentle nudge from Toby, his quiet presence reminding her that she wasn't alone. I need a moment, Anna said finally, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. She turned and walked down the aisle, Toby at her side, the guests parting in stunned silence as she passed. Once outside, Anna sank onto the chapel steps, her hands trembling as she buried her face in them. Toby pressed against her, his soft whines breaking the stillness. What do I do, Toby? She whispered, her voice cracking. How do I move forward from this? The dog responded with a quiet nuzzle, his presence a steady comfort in the storm of emotions swirling around her. Anna stroked his fur, her tears soaking into the lace of her gown. In that moment, she realized that Toby's actions, his resistance, his persistence, had been his way of protecting her, of guiding her toward the truth she needed to see. As the chapel doors opened behind her, Anna looked up to see Claire stepping out, her expression filled with concern. Anna, she said softly, sitting beside her, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Anna nodded weakly, wiping her eyes. I don't know. Everything feels shattered. Claire placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Take all the time you need. No one's rushing you. Anna glanced at Toby, his steady gaze meeting hers with a quiet strength that steadied her. She knew the decision she faced wasn't an easy one, but for the first time that day she felt clarity begin to emerge. Toby had shown her the truth, and now it was up to her to decide what to do with it, Anna sat quietly on the chapel steps, her mind racing as she processed the weight of what had just unfolded. The sound of muffled whispers drifted from inside the chapel, but she couldn't focus on anything except the ache in her chest and the unwavering presence of Toby by her side. His soft whines filled the silence, grounding her in the moment as she stroked his fur absent-mindedly. Claire remained beside her, offering quiet support without pressing for answers. After a few moments, Anna took a deep breath and stood, her legs shaky but her resolve beginning to solidify. "I need to talk to James," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tears that lingered in her eyes. Claire nodded. "Take your time. We'll be right here if you need us." Anna turned toward the chapel doors, her heart pounding as she stepped inside. The room fell silent as every pair of eyes turned to her, but she kept her focus on James, who stood at the altar looking lost and unsure. Toby stayed at her side, his head held high as though he were ready to shield her from whatever came next. "James," Anna began, her voice firm but trembling at the edges. "I need to know everything. No more hiding, no more excuses. If we're going to move forward, I need the truth." James hesitated, his gaze flicking to the man who had exposed his secrets. His brother stood silently in the back, his expression a mixture of guilt and determination. After a moment, James let out a heavy sigh and stepped forward. "You're right," he said quietly. "You deserve the truth." He explained everything, how he had fallen into debt, how he had tried to cover it up, and how his fear of losing her had driven him to lie. His voice cracked as he spoke, his vulnerability laid bare for all to see. "I was wrong," he admitted, tears glistening in his eyes. "I was wrong to keep this from you, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." Anna listened intently, her heart torn between the love she felt for him and the betrayal she couldn't ignore. When he finished, the room was silent, the weight of his confession hanging heavy in the air. After a long pause, Anna took a deep breath and looked into his eyes. "I love you, James," she said softly. "But trust is the foundation of any relationship, and right now, ours is broken. I can't marry you today, not like this." Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Anna stayed focused on James. His face fell, but he nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping as he accepted her words. "I understand," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back." Toby pressed against Anna's leg, his silent support giving her the strength to stand tall. "This isn't the end," she said, her voice steady. "But it's not the beginning I dreamed of either. We need time. Time to rebuild and be honest with each other." James wiped his eyes, managing a small, sad smile. "I'll wait as long as it takes." With that, Anna turned and walked back down the aisle, her head held high despite the tears streaming down her face. Toby followed her closely, his steady presence a reminder that she wasn't alone in her journey. As she stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air, she felt a strange sense of relief. A weight lifted as she chose to honor herself and the truth. The guests began to trickle out, offering quiet words of support as they passed. Anna's heart ached, but she knew she had made the right decision. With Toby by her side, she felt a renewed sense of clarity and strength. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Anna knelt beside Toby and cupped his face in her hands. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you for protecting me when I couldn't see the truth." Toby wagged his tail gently, his eyes filled with the unwavering loyalty that had guided her through one of the hardest days of her life. In that moment, Anna realized that the love and support she had always sought had been there all along, in the steady, selfless devotion of her beloved companion. If Anna's story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's spread the message of love, loyalty, and the courage to stand for what's right.